Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to this winter retreat. For some of us, we're more than halfway through a 7-day retreat, and for some of you, you're just beginning a 3-day retreat. I really enjoyed Sensei's Dharma talk yesterday. So full of joy and heart. And we need some of that joy and upliftedness. We can all learn to lift ourselves up. And it was just a lovely talk, moving. And I love the story about the turkey too. That was good. Good to laugh. Laughter is good medicine. And one of the things Sensei touched on in her talk was grief, which I spoke about at length back in May, and I don't want to flog a dead horse, but I don't think it's possible. This is very much a practice of the heart. And to open our hearts means that not only do we, if we're going to open to joy, we also open to sorrow. And you can't really pick and choose those and say, I'm just going to have the joy, but not the sorrow. And this has been a rough year. And it's continuing. And everything indicates this will be a pretty rough winter. And I'm sure I don't have to convince any of you of that. So grief, I think we are all grieving, whether we know it or not. And I think many of us are in some form of trauma as well. And I think part of healing that, or I don't know if we heal it, but one of the big, I'm going to talk about dark wisdom today. It's a term that comes up in the Tao Te Ching in a particular chapter we can appreciate. But one of the main teachings in Buddhism is that one of the root causes of suffering is ignorance, ignoring what is. And if I don't know, there's some of you in England, I don't know how you are in England, but we Americans don't do grief very well. We don't know how to do it. If we had grieved the Vietnam War, we would have transformed ourselves. If we had grieved 9/11, we would have transformed ourselves, but instead we went and attacked countries in a disastrous foreign policy. I'm not even sure we grieved the Civil War. We don't know how to grieve. And when we don't know how to grieve, then we pay an enormous price for that. Grieving is how we bring ourselves alive, is how we love, how we know what love is. So I think part of the fear about grief is we just don't want to open that door because we're afraid we can't close it again. So what I would say is that we're very fortunate that we have heard a spiritual, some kind of wisdom from a spiritual tradition called Zen. And that we can, when we're living in a time of so much disruption, where it's hard to know what's true, or no one agrees on what's even true, then I think it's really important that we have a spiritual path or practice which can give us an idea of what is enduring, some principles that are enduring beyond our immediate impulses and moods and emotions and whatever. And Buddhism, Taoism, Zen, Chan, this tradition has enduring principles, and these principles have been practiced and lived for thousands of years. So we're not talking about some new age thing that we just invented. And some of those principles, I would say the one that's most obvious is taking refuge. All Buddhists take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that is a principle, an enduring principle. So another principle would be that we value wisdom. What is wisdom? We live in an information age. We have too much information, but surely that is not wisdom. We value compassion and love, as most religious traditions do. We value emptiness, or the Tao, a difficult teaching to really come to terms with, but an important one. And we value no self. We value what we call the true self. So it's important in times like this that we be able to point our compass to true north. And we are all, I'm not speaking about being moralistic, but we are moral. And because we are unconditionally good as human beings, we live in a sacred world. And if we see this sacredness in our world, then we can have some confidence in ourselves and be what we call bodhisattvas, or in the Shambhala tradition, it says we can be spiritual warriors. And the idea of a bodhisattva or a spiritual warrior is not that you go out and hurt people. It's that you have some bravery and dignity as a human being, and you're brave enough to look at yourself, as Sensei said yesterday, looking inside. And that takes courage. But if you do that, and that's very much what this practice and retreats like this are about, is you develop an enormous sense of confidence and dignity that you can stand in your truth and not be blown around by everyone else's agenda. And we need you to do that. The world needs you awake. So what is wisdom? Anyone care to give it a crack? It could mean a lot of different things, but I'm sort of curious what it means to you. Anyone want to say what wisdom means to you? I think I can see you all. Yeah. What's wisdom? Surely you must have an idea. Yeah, Karen?
Yeah, I'm exploring it for sure, but to me it means knowing.
Karen, can you turn up your volume? I can't hear you very well.
Is this better?
Not too much,
Not much.
but okay. Can you speak up then a little louder?
Okay, how is this? No?
You're pretty soft.
Let me,
Can others hear her? No, your voice is very, you just have to speak up louder, Karen. Where did she go?
Okay.
Oh,
Is
there
this
you go.
better?
Yes.
I was playing with the controls. Sorry. Yeah, so to me, for now, it means sensing or knowing the right thing to do in the moment.
Okay. Sort of trusting that you know what is right in the moment and following that.
Yes.
Good.
And not acting unless you have that sense of the right thing.
Great. Yeah, I love that. So often often what happens in religions is we create rules, or you don't have to even be in a religion to do that, but we create a lot of rules to say this is if you belong to our club, you follow these rules, and then the people don't follow those rules, they don't belong to our club. And then you can become very rigid about those kind of rules, and that actually can do a lot of harm. So to be able to trust yourself and do what is appropriate in whatever context is like playing jazz, and not so easy to do, which is why we need some discipline in terms of a spiritual practice, some kind of rigor that allows us to really be here on the spot in a way that we're more likely to act appropriately in some way that would be helpful to others. Great, Karen, thank you. Anybody else? Well, you could go quick Google Wikipedia or something and get a definition of it. Come on, someone come and give it a shot. Let's just have some fun here. What's wisdom? Well, I mean, my gosh, it's a major part of our tradition.
I'd like to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Who's speaking? I can't see.
This is
hi,
Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly.
Hi.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I like what was said there and add to that a sense of heart or compassion in that understanding. So a sense of understanding with heart or compassion in that a little bit of that, I believe, that beginner's mind or that curiosity. I feel like that makes for a good recipe.
That is a good recipe. That could cook a good soup. So in our tradition, we speak about marrying wisdom and compassion. And actually, they're both really the kind of the pillars of our practice. And we tend to differentiate them a little bit. Wisdom has to do with clarity about how things are. And then compassion is how we activate that clarity in the world, how it comes. And we can have wisdom without compassion, which is a kind of a dead thing. We can be clear about reality, but if we don't activate it through love and heart and compassion, then it's not worth anything. On the other hand, if we we can have big hearts, open hearts, and be compassionate, but if we don't have wisdom, then our compassion will tend to get kind of carried away with itself and tend to be dramatic and may not actually be very helpful either. So one of the most important teachings in our tradition is that we need to marry these two. Does that make sense? Yeah. So wisdom has something about seeing things clearly, right? Seeing how things are. And I think that's one of the reasons why ignorance is often spoken of in our tradition as being one of the root causes of suffering, because ignorance literally means ignore. It doesn't mean you're stupid. Actually, there's a intelligence in ignorance. You're ignoring what is. So I don't want to get into politics here. This really shouldn't be political, that we need to wear masks and practice social distancing because we have a pandemic where thousands of people are dying every day. That should not be a political thing. It's a healthcare. It's a crisis of healthcare. So to ignore the reality of this virus and what it's doing to us is ignorance. Okay. So, there's so many things I'd like to talk about this morning. I'm not quite sure where to start. Let me say something a little bit about meditation. We're meditating together. We have various practices that you may doing. You may be counting the breath or following the breath. You may be practicing shikantaza, just sitting, or you may be doing koan study. Whatever practice you're doing, when we sit, it's a dynamic posture. Whether you're sitting on a chair or you're sitting on a cushion, you're kind of integrating heaven and earth as the Buddha in your meditation. You're sitting on a cushion or on a chair, and so you can feel your bottom. You can feel the gravity, and if you're sitting on a chair, you can feel your feet grounded on the earth, on the floor. And then you kind of lift up out of your hips, not in an extreme way, but you can feel the lift from your hips through your spine, through the crown of your head as you lift up to heaven. So when we sit in this way, the posture is dynamic. You're not just slumping like this. You're actually sitting up out of your hips and so you're being upright. You have a strong back and a soft front, is how we say. Now, we talk a lot about intention, and it's important, and we talk a lot about it in our mindfulness classes. We can harness intention, we can use our intention, and our motivation is important. And but I'd also like to suggest that there may be the intention is a kind of commitment that gets us to the cushion or gets us to some engagement in our lives. You're here in a retreat, so you've made a commitment to do this practice together. And so now that you're here, it's a choiceless choice. And part of the beauty of this is that you don't have to make the decision whether you're going to sit or not every day. You've already made the decision, so you're here. If you had to think about this every day, oh, should I, let's see, it's 6 o'clock. Oh, I don't know if I want to come and sit. If you had to do that every day, that would be exhausting. But if you've made the commitment, you've kind of internalized that intention to do this practice, and you do it, you show up. But if you have to make that choice over and over again every day, you just end up going with the lowest common denominator eventually. You know, water flows downhill, gravity takes over, and you'll be slumping sooner or later. So I think there's a sense in which we internalize the intention too. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think we can be too conscious. And it, you know, in the West, we are so individualistic. We are so individual, and there's lots of good things about that. But also, it can go too far. When people are saying, you know, it is my right not to wear a mask because I'm free, that's nonsense. That's not freedom. That's ignorance. So we are living in a world, a dystopian world that is surreal in many ways. And we're not going, and David Lloyd talks about this beautifully, you know, there's a place for agency and choice and intention, and then there's a place for a kind of collective wisdom that comes together. And I think much of what practice is getting out of the way, getting out of your way. And you need intention to show up so that you can do that. But I think getting out of your way isn't necessarily something that has anything to do with your intention. It certainly doesn't have a whole lot to do with willpower. It has more to do with surrendering and letting go. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I think there's a place for agency and intention in practice, and there's a place for really letting go and surrendering and allowing things to come towards us instead of thinking we always have to be in control, we have to be in charge. There's a tendency in Zen practice to strive for perfection, and people go too far in Zen trying to do that. So things need to be balanced out. So if you idealize enlightenment, you end up working too hard. And it's important to let the practice come to you as well. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but there's a sense of relaxing into this. You have the discipline. You don't lose, it's not like you just do anything. But once you've internalized the practice and the discipline, and you've already made the choice and the commitment to show up, then you can start to relax. And instead of it feeling like you're walking on eggshells, you can just walk on the earth with some confidence. You belong here because this is your world. It's my world. And there's really no inside or outside if you really see clearly. Yeah, we have to work with our own psychology and all that stuff has to be worked through. But at the end of the day, if you're part of wisdom is seeing there's no gap, there's no separation, and nothing is missing. So you don't have to try so hard to be good because you're already good. And if you just acknowledge, just allow yourself to be good because you already are. You don't have to try so hard. And then I think part of wisdom is when you trust yourself in that way and you show up and you can be present, you start to see who you are, which is no self. You start to see that the self you constructed is just too small. And it's based on fear. And then when you get out of the way, you discover your true self. You can really be yourself. It's a paradox, kind of ironic, that you have to get out of your way in order to really be yourself. And I guess there's always a fear that if we let go in this way and surrender, we would disappear, or we would be destroyed, or we wouldn't have any boundaries, or we would have so much grief we would be destroyed by that. And I think the practice is a way of beginning to trust the truth of yourself, that you can let go and you don't need reference points. So the thing I want to say here is that we have lots of teachings, and I want to stress that Zen is not anti-intellectual in any way whatsoever. There's room for study, there's room for rationality, for science. But the principles that we teach have all been discovered through human experience and then articulated in some way. It's not like somebody went out and created a philosophy and said there's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then discovered it experientially. It didn't work like that. No, they went inside, they explored their own experience directly, intimately, and they discovered Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then they started talking about it. And then, we're a tradition that's supposed to be beyond words and letters, my God. All the sutras and books written on Zen, there's so many. So I think it's important to get that these enduring principles that we value so much come from our human experience. We're not making these up. That's why they're enduring. So I want to bring this, I always try to bring these things down to earth so we can get these experientially. And I've said this, you probably heard me say this before, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again. I think there's sort of a three-step I'm oversimplifying a bit, but just to make a point, experientially speaking, I think there's a three-step process that gets us towards into the experience of being the spiritual warrior. And the first is you take up a practice of meditation or mindfulness, and you practice. And you make a commitment to that because you are aware that you are a creature of habits. And if you do not tame that elephant, as we speak of in the mindfulness classes, then it will run wild in the jungle and knock over a lot of trees and do a lot of damage. So you got to tame your mind in that way. And meditation is the medicine for doing that. And that's absolutely got to be done. So you practice some kind of mindfulness awareness so that you can start to cut through the speed and busyness of your mind so you can actually see what is taking place in the present. So you don't miss it. And when you do this practice over time, it works on you and it takes care of itself. I really don't have anything, I can't teach you anything that you don't already know. My job here is just to get you to sit on the cushion so you can find out for yourself. That's all Zen teachers are doing. We're just trying to encourage you to sit down and open to your own wisdom and trust your own intrinsic wakefulness, because it's already here. So you sit and you ask questions and you get curious about, and you read about the Dharma and you wonder about all this. And then you notice something really interesting starts to happen. You have a sense of, from the sitting practice, of some wholesomeness that takes place from the sitting, some sense of being genuine, sincere, straightforward, and a kind of warmth starts to, you experience a warmth, and it feels good. That genuineness in you feels uplifted and dignified. So you say, that's good, I want more of that. And then you make this discovery that when you try to possess it, it goes away. It's all gone. You just ruined it. And you gotta start all over again. Okay, back to the cushion, back to square one. I gotta start all over. And you do it again. And you keep trying to possess it. You want to package it. You want to make it into a formula. You'll read more books about it. And none of that works. None of that works. So in this experience of warmth, you begin to discover experientially that the way to have it is to not hang on to it in any way whatsoever. It's not yours. It's not mine. It has nothing to do with my agency, so to speak. It just arises because we live in this beautiful, sacred world. And in that experience of warmth is already a hint of the teaching of emptiness, which many people struggle to understand, which is that when we let go of trying to possess who we are, that who we are is already here. And that's the teaching of emptiness. And you begin to trust that. You can't understand it. You can't figure this all out intellectually, so don't try. I can't tell you what it is. all I can tell you is that from my humble experience, I've had the good fortune to have some of this experience, and I feel blessed and honored and fortunate to be able to practice with you so we can all share it together. So you start to trust this warmth, and then the third thing that happens, which I think is really important, is you start to discover there's another kind of intelligence that you have access to, and I call it a non-referential intelligence. There is an intelligence that has no reference points of this or that. It's not dualistic. Because the way we build and construct ourselves is through those reference points. That's how we solidify who we think we are. That's how we divide ourselves from me and the world, me and you, this and that, right and wrong, good and bad, winning, losing, all of that. Those are all reference points. And we could go into a lot of detail about the psychological development of ego, which we could if you want to, but we talk about this a lot in our Foundations of Mindfulness course. We spend a whole class just talking about it because it's so important to get that we've all constructed a self. It's not bad. It's part of what we need to do psychologically to find our way in the world, find a career, separate from our parents, grow up, and that ego serves us to some degree, and then it doesn't. It's terribly inefficient. And you start to, if you take up a spiritual practice like this, you start to hear these teachings about, it's not that the ego is bad, it's just not true. It's too small to contain who you are. And so you start to see that this self that you keep trying to hold together, it just doesn't actually hang together so well. And you have to work really hard to keep holding it together. It takes a lot of psychic energy to do this. And you start to discover that a lot of the source of your suffering is this self that you keep trying to hang on to. And so you learn, hopefully, through teachings like Zen, that you can actually begin to trust that there's another way of being here where you don't have to keep grabbing for the reference points. And when you start to get that, you actually start to get I would say a passion, a fire for this non-referential intelligence, and you become curious about it. It's a big discovery. In our tradition, we call this prajna wisdom. It's not wisdom about something, it's just direct experience. It's wisdom. Water is wet. Earth is hard. Eyes see. Ears hear. Nose smell. So that's the way we get, I think it's important to get that this bodhisattva vow that you hear us talk about a lot, it's not just an ideal. It actually comes organically out of your own heart and experience. When you open your heart, you find you have this sad and tender, broken heart. And that's the source of your strength. It's not a weakness, it's a strength. And it's a softness in us. Warriors are gentle. They don't brag and get, boisterous and posture. That's not what a warrior does. That's cowardly. So there's something wonderful and dignified and enduring about our tradition, I think. And I hope that you are taking some of this in and discovering it for yourselves. So now with that, I'd like to read this chapter from the Tao Te Ching. As you know, I've lately been very much taken by Taoism, because I think it's very much a part of our tradition that is often ignored. So this is chapter 28 from the Tao Te Ching. Know the masculine, keep to the feminine. Here under heaven, be a ravine. Being a ravine here under heaven, do not lose common virtue, or te. Return to the childhood state. Know the bright, keep to the dark. Be in accord with heaven. Being in such accord, common virtue does not change. Return to what is always so. Know glory, keep to the humble. Here under heaven, be a valley. Being a valley here under heaven, common virtue is sufficient. Return to the plain and simple. Plain and simple is free and unfettered, yet can be a tool in the hands of a sage. For the high government official, the best making involves no cutting. So the Tao Te Ching is one of these very old sacred texts, which it's best to just let it kind of flow over you or through you or whatever, and not try to grab onto it too much. But the reason I picked this particular passage, and I could have picked almost any one, is that it emphasizes, and this is very common in the Taoist teachings, they're very, very much emphasizing the feminine or yin, to be on the yin side. And in the Genjo Koan, Dogen speaks about the dark side of the mirror. So there's the light and dark of life. There's the pushing out, and then there's the returning. And we need both yang and yin energies, and but you know, we often just we have lots of movies about Rambo and, you know, men, heroic men that posture and stomp around and plant flags on the top of mountains and blow up people. This is the yang energy, and it's terribly destructive in so many ways. And the Taoism is very suspicious of that yang energy, and would counsel us to not, that kind of exaggerated, extended violence is not what we want to be perpetrating in the world. So we need to, as much as possible, remain on the yin side, in the valley. We climb mountains to clarify. We go to retreats like this to clarify, but at the end of the day, you go home to your family. You don't have your house on top of the mountain. It's in the valley where the ground is fertile, where you can grow food, and there's good schools for your children, where you are domestic. And warriors, men come home from wars and they're nurtured by the women. And so this, when it speaks, the Tao speaks of this dark energy. And what it means by that is, be in the valley. The ravine is a kind of mysterious place. It's not quite the valley. It's in the ravine, it's wild. the waters that flow through the ravine are wild and rapids, and yet we're attracted to that. There's something about that ravine that's dark and mysterious. But in our culture, we tend to want to have the light. We're obsessed with light. But from the point of view of Taoism, it's the dark where the wisdom resides. It's the darkness. And it's very, very hard to trust that. But I think through practice, part of the softness and gentleness that comes from opening our hearts is that we learn how to really be in the valley. And so when the men come home at the end of the day from being on top of the mountain, the Taoist will be there to give them some tea and brown rice. And the other thing that I get from this passage is this sense of innocence. And I don't want to romanticize that at all, because I think that's not helpful. But I do think there's a sense in which we return to some sincerity and genuineness of who we are through this practice. And it's a kind of innocence. It's a kind of beginner's mind, an openness. We realize there's so little we really know. And so that, I think that kind of openness and innocence is being like a child. Being able to be like a child is really important for kind of coming back and restoring the spirit and heart at the center of who we are. So a lot of the counsel of Taoism is, not to go too far, is kind of counseling moderation, humility, and but we're so obsessed with winning and being right in our culture, and it's just so. And again, the individuality, I think, is the sense in the Tao is that you be in accord with the way things are. If you're in accord with the Tao, then you are in sync with heaven and earth, and that brings about a kind of confidence in your world that you can be in your world with some sanity and balance and equanimity, and you can appreciate the practicality of earth, and you can appreciate the spaciousness and the loftiness of heaven, and you have both. And there's no metaphysical implications here. We're not talking about heaven as some place other than the place where we are. We live in a very, very large universe, larger than we can possibly imagine. And that's our world too. And so I think what I find in Taoism is so helpful is that in our culture, we tend to get attracted. We're attracted to things. We think about things, and the world isn't like that. Go out and observe nature. You won't find things. You find patterns. You find growth. You find things growing or coming out or coming back in. You find waves. So in Chinese medicine, they talk about two kinds of transformation, Bian and Hua. And Bien is the transformation that builds something up. And hua is the transformation that takes it apart, breaks it down. And they're both really important for life. But again, in our culture, we tend to be attracted to the bien. We want to go out and build something right away. But things need to be broken down before they can be built up. And a very concrete example would be just eating food. When you eat lunch today, you're going to put food in your mouth, and that food is going to go down into your stomach, and that's a hua transformation. You're going to break that food down and digest it so that your body can take that in the most, this is amazing that our bodies do this at all. It's going to take that food and totally, it's not going to be recognizable before you put it in your mouth. And then it's going to use that to build up your body, your muscles, your bones, your organs, your blood. All that's the bien transformation. But the hua transformation, you got to have that. And so what I would say is we are going through such a disruption in our culture where things are breaking down, and to be living in the middle of it is very, very difficult. But one way to think about this is it also is making room for something new. And we can't know what that is yet, but we could, and here I'm going to contradict everything I just said about intention. We could, through our motivation intention, direct that in some small way through who we are and how we behave and what we do. We could direct that towards a more sustainable planet and a culture and a country that has less racial and economic disparities. We could. And maybe that's more possible now than it was before the pandemic. I don't know. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, the earth was a lot happier when we were all sequestered. The waters were cleaner, the air was cleaner. We couldn't do that for too long, but for a while, the earth was pretty happy. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say today. Maybe we could have a little discussion, comments, stories, anything.
I realize, Roshi, that I don't understand Tao at all.
Yeah.
After listening to that, not at all.
Yeah. The Tao is the source, but it really doesn't have a name. The Tao that has a name is not the Tao. So it's a source in the sense that it's not yet tangible to our eyes or our senses. It's something, it's the pattern of the whole. And part of that pattern is something outside of our material realm that we can't see or hear. And it's trusting in that whole pattern. And for us to have yin and yang, there has to be something that's outside of space and time as we understand it, from which those things arise. And it's not unlike the notion of emptiness that we speak of in Buddhism. but emptiness seems to, in the Buddhist tradition, have a kind of a more metaphysical implication. And I think the beauty of Taoism, it's really a natural science. And if you go into Chinese medicine, it's an empirical science that is really rigorous and pretty powerful, without any metaphysical implications that come from Indian culture or Buddhism. And I think that's a kind of very interesting to me. I'm not taking sides with anything. I just think that there's a quality about Taoism that that is very sacred and spiritual to me, but doesn't seem to carry the metaphysical implications that come from Buddhism. And I'm just curious about that. But no one understands the Tao any more than we understand emptiness. But that doesn't mean that it's not important. It doesn't mean that it's not important.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that by my question.
Uh-huh.
In fact, the opposite, I think.
Yeah. They have a pad. There's one chapter in the Tao where they talk about the hub and the wheel, and how the Tao they're always talking about the Tao is what's not there, but it makes everything else possible. So you can't have a wheel without the hub, and you can't have a house without windows and doors, and it's like that. So there's this sense that the Tao is at the heart of everything, and yet it's not there. But it makes everything else possible. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah, Tanya?
One thing that strikes me as important to also emphasize is that yang can also be used in order to create sources of joy, to create good things. So the active principle is not bad in itself. It is a source. It can be a good or a bad thing. And I don't know how, since you mentioned that the stories are okay, I am going to go here with a story from Christianity, and I hope nobody will be upset with this. So the famous Virgin Mary is famous because she's so meek. She's so yin throughout all of the Bible and so forth. But one of the important stories about her is the story when she is young. Her behavior is young type behavior when she tells Jesus to make wine from water on a marriage celebration in order to make people happy. And that is the first miracle he does. And I've always felt like that story is extremely important to remind us what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to actively take part in making others happy. Sorry.
Right? Yeah. Well,
I'm talking about this conceptually. I'm not really talking about this from the religious perspective.
no, but I hear it from your heart, the love. It's about love, isn't it? Really about loving and making a
Yes.
difference and helping others and there's
doing stuff that is seemingly trivial
uh-huh.
actually is just as important.
Yeah. There's a sense in Taoism that we need to have both the yin and the yang in balance, and sometimes you have to go out and build something or fix something, and it takes some yang energy. And I don't think it's oversimplification just to say these are male and female. We have both, whether we're male or female, because actually a lot of women now are working like men used to work. So those stereotypes don't work anymore. So we have both kinds of energies in us. energies for doing and energies for receiving. And I think the yin side is about listening and receiving, and the yang side is about, you know, doing and activating. And we need both. But the basic sense of Taoism is that once you're done doing the yang stuff, go back to the yin side, because the yang can get carried away with itself very easily, and it's kind of blind then. And so then we need to come back and be able to listen and receive. But I think the important point here is that wisdom and love go together. We cannot really separate them. There has to be, if we're going to be skillful in the world, we need wisdom and we need love. And love can be just how you, it can be something really simple, like how you, if you're tired at the end of the day and or your kids are acting out, how you treat them, how you behave and when you're under stress, or just a simple act of kindness. So love doesn't have to be some big dramatic gesture. It can be something very simple and ordinary too. I love that you brought that in about Mary. Thank you.
I was going to, I was really captivated by that part where you said that wisdom is in darkness. And I think that's in the Tao. And it instantly reminded me of, you know, when we're sitting in Zazen, closing your eyes and going inward. And that's the wisdom. And it also reminded me of Dogen's saying where he's like reaching behind yourself for the pillow in the dark. It's all faith. Thank you.
Yeah. We can be kind of obsessed with the light and with some sense of purity. And I think the darkness has to do with being able to be ourselves and not be perfect, and that there's wisdom there in our imperfections, in our foibles and mistakes, and there could be wisdom there too. And we won't just find it in the light. We'll find it in the unconscious, in the shadows, is where, you know, Taoism is very suspicious about social norms, people behaving in some conventional way that's proper. And, you know, so the Tao would say if someone behaves properly in a social sense, you're probably going to treat them formally because you don't really trust them. But if someone is uncontrived, unfettered, and sincere, in a kind of genuine, you know, innocent, childlike way, you trust that person. So I'm not suggesting we should all become Taoists, because I think it's in many ways kind of anarchy, and doesn't, you know, it tends towards quietism. So actually, one of the wonderful things that Mahayana Buddhism brought to the table was a practice, a container, and a way to take these teachings and turn the Dharma wheel, so to speak. And it reminds me of Krishnamurti, who was always talking about enlightenment, and say, you tell his students just wake up, but he didn't tell them how to do it. And I think Buddhism tells us how to do it. It gives us a path that we can practice on. So that's important. Okay. Patrick?
Hi, Roshi. Hi, everybody. I really like the idea of being like a child. My wife and I went away recently for a couple of weeks for her birthday. And over many years, I've given her some really nice gifts and bought her some really lovely jewelry and stuff like that. But while we were on vacation, we were staying in a little cottage, and I didn't have a gift. So we got up in the morning and I suggested we play hide and seek. So we played hide and seek in this little 2-bedroom house that was no bigger than the condo we live in, or maybe the first floor of the Zen Center. And it was probably the most joyous I've ever seen my wife since our wedding day. And it was just beautiful. The two of us were squealing like children. It overtook us. You know, it just overtook us. We were 7 and 8 years old while we were doing this. And I was able to do that. And I think this practice has a lot to do with me and her actually just opening up to each other like that and putting it all out there and saying, let's just do this, you know. And it was just wonderful. And I really enjoyed the idea of the childishness and the wonder that is right here. It's just right here. All we have to do is open our eyes and take it, because it's there for the take.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I miss about not being together physically is that when we eat meals together in retreat, even though we're in silence, there's often quite a bit of giggling and silliness because there's that energy is just coming up, and you get it. I mean, and then we break the rules, you know, and someone, you know, breaks the rule because rules are meant to be broken. But there's a lot of laughter and good humor that comes up through this practice, and I think it's really important that we almost feel guilty because there's so much suffering in the world right now that we shouldn't be permitted to have joy or humor, and it's just not. That's just a really awful thought that we shouldn't be able to have joy or good cheer. And I think much of what happens as a spiritual warrior is that you're able to lift yourself up when things are tough, and you can then be of service to others because you find that you have enormous resources of strength within yourself to deal with challenges. And isn't that the point? Really, practice helps us be resilient, and life is going to present all kinds of difficulties to us. So the reason Zen or Chan was born in China was out of a very hard, difficult civil war where it was said that 1/3 of the population died from famine, rape, hunger, disease. And that was when Chan was born in China, because it didn't look away from that. It offered a teaching that allowed people to bear witness and work with that suffering, not to ignore it or to run away from it, but to look at it. And a lot of these Chan teachers just walked through these battlefields over and over, just did pilgrimages through these desolate war-torn landscapes. Okay, that's probably enough for one morning. So we'll have lunch and get a good rest, sleep, stretch, take care of your body. This is a very physical practice, so it helps to take care of the body. And we'll meet again at 3 o'clock. If you're in the 3-day retreat, you'll want to sit this afternoon. Some of you that are doing the 7-day may be doing what's called the practice of immediacy today, and so may not be at the 3 o'clock sitting. And for those of you in the 3-day retreat, if you wish to do the practice of immediacy tomorrow, I'll give you a brief explanation of what that is at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Okay? All right, thank you.